All right, I think I'll get going. Hey guys, thanks for coming. My name is RJ Mahadev. I'm in Cisco and I'm here to talk to you about the IoT bubble. Do we have any hope here, or is it all hype? So I was at this conference last week called the Internet of Things World Forum, www.iotwf.com. And it was really interesting. So this was in Chicago. There were about 2,000 people. And it was quite a different crowd. It was fewer developers, more sort of big businesses, big customers, talking about what they thought the Internet of Things, where it was and what was going to happen. And it was really exciting because everybody was talking about it's here, it's now, it's going to be everywhere, it's this incredible thing that's going to change the world. And I was all fired up with this, and I got back to the city and went to a party over the weekend. And I was all excited telling people, oh my God, IoT, Internet of Things, it's this huge thing. And beside me there was a guy who was a hairdresser, a celebrity hairdresser, and he got all the attention and I got none of it. So, I figured IoT is not going to make me more interesting. It's just going to be something that could possibly change the world. Anyway, thanks for coming to this. One of the things I wanted to do today was, I know we all fight fires every day. We sort of have really busy lives. We are out there building new things, developing new code, figuring out new ways of doing things. And it's almost like you're in the middle of this forest, there's this fire happening, there's fire everywhere, and you're cutting down trees and you're lining them up so you're making sure that you have a path out of here. And then occasionally, some of us like to climb a tree, look around us, and realize that, hey, wait a minute, that fire is not in this forest, it's in a different forest. Right? So one of the things I was hoping we could do today is do that. Climb a tree and think about, what is this IoT thing really about? And is it really as big as everybody says it's going to be? Right? So a little bit about me. I'm with Cisco, founded in 1984. Little factoid, we've been named after San Francisco, so this is kind of home for us. We tend to focus more on the industrial IoT space, so more communications and analytics enablement for more of the industrial side. And I've been working on IoT now for a fair few years. We did a paper in 2011 predicting 50 billion devices, and that was a big deal. Everybody was saying, oh my God, 50, what are you, crazy? And I think most of us, if you ask us now, 50 is probably low, right? So there's a huge demand that we see for this, a huge opportunity, right? So my role is I spend a lot of time talking to partners and customers about where IoT is going, how we can build solutions that integrate them with Cisco products. And there's a couple of useful insights I've gotten out of my chats with different folks, right? So one of those is, I think it's a huge opportunity, and I'm going to talk to you about why we believe it's so big. And I do think we're not yet at the inflection point, so I'll talk to you a little bit about that and what I think is happening around that. The other big thing is, I think most of us that grew up in sort of the Web 1.0 and 2.0 world have a certain way of doing things, where we've had a platform handed to us, and our life's been about how do we build some unique competitive advantage and differentiation based on those common platforms. I think the IoT battle is different. I think it's more of Wild West, and we still trying to figure out how you enable devices. We're still trying to figure out what are application platforms that we can use. And so I think the rules of success are going to be different as well. So I think it's more about interdependency. So we do depend a lot more on each other. So joint consortiums, figuring out how you use the network differently, I think is going to be one of the key things as we go forward. Right. So let me jump to this. So, hey, I think this is the favorite part of most conferences, random lists of things that absolutely have no connection to each other, right? But of course, you guys are smart and you figure out, okay, these are all the things the internet is disintermediated, right? So think about that, right? So think about how we used to do shopping, how we did telecom, how entertainment worked, and how social interaction worked, and how that's changed, right? So the internet did change a lot about the way we think, right? And the way we do things and how we live. However, how much did it really change in the economy, right? So how many people can take a stab at telling me so there's actually some pretty good research around what % the internet has actually affected the economy? Any guesses? It's less than 5%, right? So, while the internet was a huge thing for all of us in this room, it actually hasn't changed the economy as much as we think it has, right? So, one of the things that's useful to think about is, kind of what happened, right? So, charts we're all familiar with, the one at the bottom is the NASDAQ, and kind of between those years, between 97 and 2000, how it went from just over 1,000 to 5,000. It was incredible, right? A ton of people, waiters in restaurants talking to us about giving us stock tips and telling us what to buy, right? And then the graph above that is actually internet usage. And as you can see, there wasn't that much rocket science to the dot-com bubble, right? Internet usage was really increasing and it was on this incredible trajectory. And people pretty much knew that the internet was becoming a thing before companies started investing a lot of money in dot-coms, right? And the stuff, the seeds for what made that happen was sown way back in the early 80s when Apple and Microsoft, were pushing the PCs. Microsoft got with IBM and Intel and created an x86 chip and started really pushing PCs. The internet came around. DARPA rebuilt the internet in the mid-90s with Cisco trying to figure out, okay, how do we start building common communication infrastructures? And then, of course, the World Wide Web in '93, right, with Amazon and Google coming together, right? So by the time, my point is, by the time '97 rolled around, all of those piece parts were in place, and people could actually see a great increase in usage, and therefore, you started seeing all this funding coming in, right? So let's talk about the Internet of Things, right? The Internet of Things could possibly change a lot for us, right? It could change cities. When we were in Chicago last week, Raul Emanuel was there talking about how Chicago is now becoming a competitive world city, and his big strategy around that is connecting the city, right? Increasing education. The same thing with factories. The same thing with how we spend and use time, right? And one of the things that Cisco we did this Internet of Things value at stake, where we predicted by 2022 there's going to be $19 trillion worth of value created by the Internet of Things, right? So let me kind of put that in perspective. The world economy today, the global GDP, is about 77 trillion, right? So 19 trillion is about 26% effect on global economy. And granted it's going to be a few years, but so if the internet just did 5%, what do we think the Internet of Things is going to do 26%, right? And so to get there, what we did was we studied about 62 different use cases across the board, right? And we didn't look at how much customers are going to spend on the internet. We looked at how much value is going to be created by the Internet of Things, right? So how much value is going to be created from reduction in greenhouse gases to society as a whole? How much value is going to be created by reduced costs of things because things are cheaper now? How much value is going to be created by increased productivity? So we looked at all of that, and we looked at it across different industries. And what we saw was the IoT is going to touch different industries differently. So the big touch was going to be to manufacturing, oil and gas, just general manufacturing. 34% of the value is going to be there. Public sector with cities is going to be at 20%. And then, of course, you've got retail, you've got finance, healthcare, and insurance, and things like that, right? So that was one big takeaway, was the huge effect the Internet of Things is going to have in manufacturing, right? The other big thing that we saw was where not only was it going to be kind of business to business as opposed to more business commerce, also the kinds of things. It wasn't that much people to things, it was more things to things. So, that's kind of where we see the big opportunity is, how do we automate things and then bring in the analytics to it so people are pulled out of that decision and things can communicate to other things and keep the world spinning, right? So that was the big opportunity we saw. And so then the question is, how far away are we from that, right? So today, we think there's about, give or take, 6 devices per household in the US that are connected on the internet. And we think that the Internet of Things has had about a $600 billion effect on the economy, right? So essentially in the next 12 years, there's kind of 2 ways we can go. One is we can have this exponential growth where we're going to, let's say 20-year device, 90 trillion, right? And the other is, maybe that's not gonna happen, right? And so the question is, what's gonna happen, number one, and number two, how can we make the good thing happen and so we can all sort of make money and retire to the Grand Caymans or someplace away from here, right? So the first thing is, let's put the 6 devices in perspective. So today, we estimate there's something like 20 billion connected devices, right, in the world. But that 20 billion is less than 1% of the total connectable devices, right? So we've only kind of seen a real small sliver of devices that can be connected. And even when you get to the 19 trillion and the 50 billion devices, you're still talking about 3 to 4% of the devices being connected. And so clearly a lot of that has to do with the actual devices. I mean, there's a ton of devices out there. That isn't growing very quickly, right? So how do you start folding all those legacy devices in? Sensor shipments are going off the roof. There's about 14 billion sensors that were going to be shipped this year, and that's a 230% increase over what was shipped last year. So you're seeing a huge increase in sensor shipments, which is incredibly important. But what we haven't really seen is how do we start attaching those sensors to devices? And that's probably an area that's really looking for a killer app or a killer solution, right? So that's one area where it's more about sort of connecting the devices and less about the applications, right, that we ought to think about. The communications is there because guess what? This is the Internet of Things and the Internet exists, so that piece is kind of pretty much there. The other piece is analytics, which of course starts becoming huge when you're talking about things to things, right? It's all about extracting information from one set of things, doing some analysis over that, and helping that control a different set of things. So analytics becomes huge, the devices become huge, and the thing to think about devices is, America is going to be the first country that gets the Internet of Things because, hey, we buy more stuff than any other country in the world, right? So we're going to be buying those new devices, but what about the rest of the world, right? How are they going to start getting connected devices, and how are we going to start pushing that? So that's sort of the thing to think about, right? So where's Cisco going with all of this? So one of the things we presented at the Internet of Things World Forum is a reference model. Now again, this is not an architecture. I think it's too early for an architecture, and I know there's a ton of people here that are going to be talking about Internet of Things architectures, and they're going to be talking about Internet of Things platforms. I think we're not at that point yet, right? I think we first need a common taxonomy, right? So it's a reference model, like the OSI stack. We need a reference model for the Internet of Things. And you'll see it's kind of different things, right? So, it's not sort of the physical layer, the data layer, the link layer, and all the OSI things, right? Where as a group, once you figure all those out, we can go focus on applications, make a ton of money on it. Here, we've still got a bunch of stuff we've got to figure out, right? The physical devices and connectivity we've got to figure out. The data, edge computing, right? So a lot of us talk about that, about how in the Internet of Things, there's going to be so much computing happen with the device. You can't have a traditional client-server model. You've got to come up with something different, right? So these things like fog computing that are coming around, where you're going to push the computing down closer to the device, so you can do some level of parsing, and you can decide what information you actually send back to the cloud. And maybe, and there's going to be some devices that require immediate feedback, and they don't want to wait for the device to go all the way back to the application. So you're going to have to develop different application architectures that are distributed, that actually have the application sitting on the edge computing or the fog computing layer, right? We're going to have to figure out how we do the abstraction. And then number 7 is kind of an important one, right? So as technologists, we tend to focus on the technology and we forget about the people and processes. And I think more and more, if we do not figure out how we integrate technology into how people do things, we're going to start seeing that leveling off of the technology, right? So there's a lot of talk in the city right now. Oh my God, the Nasdaq is at 5,000 again. Burn rates are higher than they've ever been for startups. Are we, getting to another bust, right? And that is possible if we only depend on the internet for our economy. But if we start figuring out how we think about the Internet of Things and how we integrate better with people and processes, I think we're going to do a lot more at sort of making the Internet of Things happen, right? So here's some of the things I'd like you guys to take away from this conversation. So number one is, it's got to be OpenStack. It's got to be industry protocols. It's got to be how do you move away from proprietary to kind of common standards, and how do we start working on common standards, right? The other big thing is joint consortiums. There's about 7 IoT consortiums around right now. There's about 260 large companies that have joined consortiums. Here's some of the consortiums you can join. The IPSO, the IP for Smart Objects, the Industrial Internet Consortium, there's about 50 members now. OIC has about 24 members. Figure out what's going on at the consortium, because that's where they're figuring out how you can start pulling these things together so you can get a platform together, right? And then from Cisco's perspective, we're doing a lot around innovation centers. We now have 8 global innovation centers just spread in different parts of the world, focusing on different things. We've invested in about 22 startups as part of our sort of VC slush fund. So this is $150 million we've set aside just to invest in IoT startups. It is not what we do M&A, where Cisco is one of the really prevalent M&A players. It's something separate from that. And we've got lots of application communities where we're doing things like APIs and SDKs. So more and more, since you don't have a common software application available, a lot of the real innovative IoT applications are coming to touch the network and integrate with the network. And that's a lot of what we're seeing is how do you use the network as a platform so you can better reach your devices and really enable the Internet of Things. So that's about all I had for now. I'll, I guess, take a few questions before I get thrown off here. Any questions or comments? Good.
So there's a 20% about public section. Will you elaborate a little bit more about that?
The public sector?
Yeah, the 20%.
So it's interesting. So we see that one of the platform creators anymore are going to be cities, because cities now have to start competing for talent and for money, right? And technology is cool. Most companies, look at the valuation of, let's say, a Tesla versus a GM, right? Tesla has $2 billion in revenue and something like 35 billion in market cap. GM has 155 billion in revenue, but 55 billion in market cap, right? So cities are realizing that they need to invest in technology. And so what we see is we're starting to see a lot of cities invest in a common technology platform for lighting, for traffic lights, for schools, for healthcare. There's no reason, nobody's going to build those separately. So that's sort of the platforms they see in a city is where public sector is going. Good?
So I guess I've seen the 50 billion device estimate. I've always been befuddled by that number. Do you feel that number is actually going to be driven by industrial automation? And sometimes I've seen some other slides that show that number includes mobile devices. Is that the case?
50 billion, a lot of it is industrial. And it's going to be consumer as well, so it's going to be a combination of both. The problem with industrial that I think a few other folks have noted is they don't change equipment that fast, right? And consumers as well. Think about how often you buy a fridge versus how often you change your handset, right? So that is the challenge I think we're going to face. To get to that inclination point is how do we get devices smarter?
Okay. Now, how do you see the Cisco play with the other initiatives around the world in terms of IoT, like Web of Things, Internet of Things? cyber-physical systems, all these fuzzy words at the end is the convergence of this technology with application. We are facing all these transitions from software-oriented to user-oriented, and what will be the role of Cisco to, or what is the vision of Cisco to integrate them, if there is a plan for that?
So one thing I think we all agree is it is going to be about the Internet of Things. So the Internet starts being the glue more. IP addressing, I mean, that's one of the things you're seeing with IPv6 addressing. So we've done deployments of 2 to 5 million IPv6 devices for very specific use cases like electric meters, right? So again, it's in the industrial space, but once you have an electric meter with an IPv6 address on it, not only can you use it for reading your power, but you can use it for things like load management, and you can have other disparate applications that have the right permission, grab metadata off that meter, and then start providing that to users in different ways. And that's, we think is going to be really important with the Internet of Things, is IP addressing and coming to some of the common protocols around that.
So touching on what you said on common protocols, what is like the standard communication protocol for the Internet of Things? I mean, is there like one single protocol that's going to encompass everything where you write an app surrounded around this specific protocol, or is there going to be a bunch of different protocols or APIs that's available for everybody? I mean, what's your thought on that?
So I think, so obviously we're seeing different protocols at different layers. Ripple and CoAP are the two ones that we're seeing a lot of energy around, and 6LoWPAN. So Google, for instance, has adopted 6LoWPAN for the Nest, right? So they've adopted that as their standard. Cisco has been using 6LoWPAN with a lot of our sort of, and we push the RC for that as well, so it'll act as a better glue for getting to sort of the MAC layer and the IP layer. So I think those are some of the protocols that we see down lower in the stack. As you get higher up into the application stack, definitely CoAP, HTML, some of that is really how we see things happening. But we've got to drive those common protocols lower in the stack so we can let that happen.
So you mentioned, I've seen similar pitches from Cisco about pushing intelligence down to the edge. Where do you see the edge? What device would that be? Would that be a home router or a data center router?
It's either going to be a switch, so in the industrial sense, it'll probably be a layer 2 switch. So I don't know, how many of you guys work in the industrial space as opposed to the consumer space? A few, right? So in the industrial space, you have this thing called the Purdue model, the IS-95 model, which has levels as opposed to, and generally in the industrial space, so most devices you have, thermostats, etc. The general sort of accepted wisdom in the industrial space is anything level 3 and below is what controls the device, and that is never opened up to the internet. So it has to be done in that layer. So you essentially got control, and the SCADA is never leaving the proximity of the device.
So you would see opening up the network layer.
Yeah. So down in that layer, and then
programmable.
And so we just announced a platform called IOX, where we can now host Linux on Cisco devices, iOS devices. So we have a lot of builders building applications and building on Linux. So it's going to sit on that edge router, and it can start doing some of the parsing around it.
What would be the position of open platforms? Like we have seen already Mac IoT toolkits, we have seen already Google toolkits. Are we expecting, or shall we expect Cisco toolkit for IoT?
Yes, definitely. So we have quite a few APIs and toolkits available, and we definitely see the world going in the direction of software-defined networking (SDN). And so we are now more and more opening up the network for APIs so developers can connect directly into the network and applications can use it. And guys, I know we are running out of time. I'm eating into somebody else's time, but I'll stand outside if you have more questions around it. I'm sorry to the next person for